The chemical spray hit Scout's face before I even realized what was happening. My service dog yelped and frantically pawed at his eyes while the woman in the floral blouse stood over us, can still raised, a look of righteous indignation on her face. "No dogs allowed in the community garden," she shrieked. "I'm the HOA president, and I've told you people 1,000 times. That moment would change both our lives forever, hers more than mine." What she didn't realize as she assaulted my medical equipment was that she had just committed a federal offense that would land her in jail and make her the most hated person in Oakwood Estates. My name is Alex Weber. I'm a 32-year-old former combat medic who served 2 tours in Afghanistan before a roadside IED changed my life forever. The physical injuries healed mostly, but the PTSD didn't. That's where Scout came in, a 2-year-old German shepherd trained specifically to help veterans like me recognize and manage panic attacks, flashbacks, and nightmares. Scout had been my constant companion for the past 18 months, transforming my life from a paranoid existence confined mostly to my apartment to something resembling normal. We had moved into Oakwood Estates 6 months ago, a quiet suburban community with neat rows of townhomes, community amenities, and an apparently draconian homeowners association. That Tuesday morning had started like any other. Scout and I had gone for our morning walk, his service vest clearly marked with "Service Dog, Do Not Pet" patches. We often stopped by the community garden, a peaceful spot where the scent of herbs and flowers seemed to ground me on difficult days. There was a bench tucked away in the corner where I could sit and just breathe when the world felt too close, too loud, too dangerous. "Scout, come," I said quietly, guiding him toward our usual spot. The garden was empty, as it typically was. At 7:30 a.m., most residents were either getting ready for work or already gone. That's why I liked coming early. Fewer people meant fewer potential triggers. I hadn't noticed Patricia Wilkins entering from the garden's rear gate. I knew who she was, of course. Everyone in Oakwood knew Patricia, or HOA Karen as many residents secretly called her. 60-something, always impeccably dressed with her salon-perfect blonde bob. She had run the Homeowners Association with an iron fist for over a decade. "Excuse me," her voice cut through the morning quiet like a siren. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned slowly, a technique my therapist had taught me to avoid, startling myself. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilkins. Just enjoying the garden." She marched toward us, pointing dramatically at the small sign near the entrance. "Can't you read? No pets allowed in the garden. The rules are clear." "Scout isn't a pet," I explained calmly, having had this conversation with other residents before. "He's a service dog. Federal law permits—" "I don't care what you claim he is," she interrupted, her face flushing. "Dog hair and waste don't belong near our community herbs and vegetables. I've had complaints." I took a deep breath. Scout, sensing my rising anxiety, pressed his body against my leg, a grounding technique he'd been trained to perform. "Mrs. Wilkins, Scout is a trained service animal, and under the Americans with Disabilities Act, he's allowed to accompany me in all public spaces. He's always leashed and well-behaved." Something about my calm explanation seemed to infuriate her further. Perhaps she wasn't used to having her authority questioned. "I'm sick of you people using service animal as an excuse. Half of these supposed service dogs are just pets with vests people buy online." She fumbled in her purse. "I have his certification and training documents if you'd like to see them," I offered, reaching for my wallet. Scout remained perfectly positioned against my leg, performing exactly as his thousands of hours of training had prepared him to do. What happened next occurred so quickly, I barely had time to process it. Patricia pulled something from her purse, A small canister I initially thought might be hand sanitizer. Before I could react, she aimed it directly at Scout and sprayed. The effect was instantaneous. Scout yelped in pain, pulling away from me and frantically pouring at his face. The acrid smell of pepper spray filled the air. "There," Patricia said triumphantly. "Now get that animal out of our garden." Time seemed to slow down. I dropped to my knees beside Scout, who was whimpering and rubbing his face against the grass. In distress, my hands shook as I tried to examine him, to see how badly he'd been hurt. "What have you done?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "You just pepper-sprayed a service dog. That's a federal offense." "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed, dropping the canister back into her purse. "It's just animal repellent. Perfectly legal." I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," she challenged. "I'm the one enforcing the rules here. You're trespassing in a garden where dogs aren't allowed." As I dialed 911, the familiar tightness gripped my chest. Without Scout's assistance, I could feel a panic attack approaching, the shallow breathing, the tunnel vision, the overwhelming sense of danger. But in that moment, something else overrode my anxiety: rage. "What's your emergency?" "A woman just pepper-sprayed my service dog at Oakwood Estates Community Garden on Maple Drive," I managed to say. "My dog needs medical attention, and I'd like to report an assault." "Officers are on their way," the dispatcher assured me. "Is the person who sprayed your dog still there?" "Yes," I said, looking up at Patricia, who was now talking animatedly on her own phone, probably calling HOA reinforcements. "She's the HOA president." While waiting for the police, I found the garden hose and gently rinsed Scout's eyes as he whimpered. Other residents had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. "Did Patricia spray that dog?" I heard someone ask incredulously. "That's Alex's service dog. What was she thinking?" Patricia stood her ground, explaining loudly to anyone who would listen that she was enforcing community rules, that I had been warned multiple times, a complete fabrication, and that the dog shouldn't have been there in the first place. By the time 2 police cruisers pulled up outside the garden gate, a small crowd had gathered. Officer Rodriguez approached first, taking in the scene. Scout still trembling and blinking rapidly, my hands wet from rinsing his eyes, and Patricia standing, with arms crossed. "What happened here?" Officer Rodriguez asked. Before I could answer, Patricia jumped in. "I'm Patricia Wilkins, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. This man has repeatedly violated our no pets policy in the community garden. After multiple warnings, I had to use deterrent spray to protect our property." Officer Rodriguez turned to me, his expression neutral. "And you are?" "Alex Weber. This is Scout, my registered service dog." Mrs. Wilkins approached us while we were sitting quietly on that bench. Without provocation, she pepper-sprayed Scout, directly in the face. "I have his service animal certification in my wallet." The second officer, whose nameplate read Chen, was speaking with witnesses. I could see him nodding as one of my neighbors, Maria from 3 doors down, gestured animatedly. "May I see your service animal documentation?" Officer Rodriguez asked. I handed him Scout's paperwork, the official certification, his training completion documents from Patriot Paws service dogs, and my own medical documentation authorizing a service animal. Officer Rodriguez reviewed the papers thoroughly, then handed them back. "Mr. Weber, are you aware that interfering with a service animal is a federal offense under the Americans with Disabilities Act?" "Yes, I am," I answered. He turned to Patricia. "Ma'am, did you spray this dog with pepper spray or another chemical irritant?" Patricia's confidence seemed to waver slightly. "It's just animal repellent. I have the right to protect community property from animals." "May I see the spray you used?" With visible reluctance, Patricia withdrew the canister from her purse. "Officer." Rodriguez examined it, then passed it to Officer Chen, who had joined us. "Mrs. Wilkins, this is pepper spray, which is classified as a defensive weapon in this state." "You've just admitted to using it against a certified service animal," Officer Rodriguez said. "I need to inform you that interfering with a service animal is a federal offense." The color drained from Patricia's face. "That's absurd. I was enforcing HOA rules. HOA rules don't supersede federal law, ma'am," Officer Chen said quietly. "The ADA specifically protects service animals and their handlers. I'd like to press charges," I said firmly, stroking Scout's head. His eyes were still red and irritated, but the frantic pouring had stopped. What followed was surreal. Patricia Wilkins, HOA president, community garden guardian, and self-appointed rule enforcer, was read her Miranda rights in front of a growing crowd of neighbors. As Officer Chen escorted her to the police cruiser, she kept insisting there had been a misunderstanding, that she didn't know Scout was a real service dog. "We'll need you to bring Scout to a veterinarian and get documentation of his injuries," Officer Rodriguez told me. "Would you like us to call animal control to transport him?" "No, my neighbor can drive us," I said, nodding toward Maria, who had already offered her help. "But I do need a police report for legal purposes." "You'll have that," he assured me. "We take service animal interference very seriously." As they drove away with Patricia in the back seat of the cruiser, I realized my hands were still trembling, not from anxiety this time, but from anger and relief that justice would be served. What I didn't realize then was that this incident would balloon into something much bigger than a neighborhood dispute. Patricia Wilkins had no idea what she had set in motion that quiet Tuesday morning, or how far-reaching the consequences would be. The veterinarian's diagnosis was chemical, conjunctivitis in both of Scout's eyes. "Thankfully," she said, "I had done exactly the right thing by immediately flushing his eyes with water, likely preventing more serious damage." "He's a tough boy," Dr. Sanderson said, gently applying medicated drops to Scout's eyes. "But he'll need these drops 4 times daily for the next week, and he should wear this protective cone to prevent him from pawing at his eyes." I stared at the plastic cone in dismay. "Will this affect his ability to work as a service dog?" She nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so. For at least the next 7-10 days he'll be uncomfortable, and his vision may be slightly impaired. The cone will definitely interfere with some of his tasks." My heart sank. Scout wasn't just my companion, he was my medical equipment, my lifeline. What would I do without his assistance for more than a week? "I'll write a detailed report about his injuries." "And treatment for your legal case," Dr. Sanderson added, seeming to sense my distress. "What happened to Scout is inexcusable, and there should be consequences." By the time we returned home, word had spread throughout Oakwood Estates. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages from neighbors offering support, expressing outrage, and sharing their own HOA Karen stories. Apparently, Patricia had built quite a reputation for extreme rule enforcement over the years. That evening, a gentle knock at my door revealed Eleanor, the 80-year-old grandmother from the end unit, standing there with a covered dish. "I brought lasagna," she announced, pushing past me into the apartment, "and I want to see how the brave dog is doing." Scout, cone around his neck and eyes still red, wagged his tail weakly from his bed. "Poor baby," Elena cooed, setting down her lasagna to gently stroke his head. "What kind of monster sprays a dog? And a hero dog at that?" Over the next few days, Elena proved to be just the first in a parade of neighbors bringing food, dog treats, and offers of help. Maria drove me to appointments. Tony, from upstairs, a fellow veteran, offered to accompany me on walks when I felt anxious without Scout's full assistance. The community I had barely interacted with before suddenly enveloped me in support, but not everyone was on my side. Patricia's friends from the HOA board had begun a whisper campaign, suggesting I had provoked her, that Scout wasn't really a service dog, that I was exaggerating his injuries for attention or financial gain. 3 days after the incident, I received A certified letter from Wilkins and Associates, attorneys at law. Apparently Patricia's son was a lawyer. The letter demanded I cease and desist from making slanderous statements regarding Patricia Wilkins, and threatened a countersuit for fraudulent service animal representation and community rule violations. I showed the letter to Maria, who worked as a paralegal. She snorted derisively. "Classic intimidation tactic," she said. "Forward this to your attorney. This actually helps your case. It shows consciousness of guilt." My attorney was Catherine Oakes, a no-nonsense former prosecutor who specialized in ADA cases. When I'd called her office and explained what happened, she had taken my case immediately. "This is textbook service animal interference," she'd said during our consultation. "And the fact that she's attempting to intimidate you afterward makes it even worse." The criminal case proceeded quickly. Patricia was formally charged with interfering with a service animal, a federal offense under the ADA 2, animal cruelty 3, assault, since Scout was legally considered my medical equipment, possession and illegal use of a defensive weapon. The district attorney had initially offered a plea deal, community service and a fine, but Patricia, on advice from her son, had refused, insisting she would be exonerated at trial. Meanwhile, Catherine filed a civil lawsuit on my behalf, seeking damages for, soon, Scout's medical expenses, 2, temporary loss of service animal assistance, 3, emotional distressor. Punitive damages 2 weeks after the incident, while Scout was still recovering, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. Evidently, Patricia's actions had created a massive liability issue for the entire association. Their insurance company had made it clear that they wouldn't cover damages from what they described as willful misconduct by a board member. I attended the meeting with Catherine, Scout walking carefully beside me, still wearing his protective cone. When we entered the community center, the room fell silent. About 50 residents were already seated, with the remaining HOA board members at a table up front. Patricia's chair sat conspicuously empty. Gerald Fisher, the vice president, cleared his throat. "This emergency meeting of the Oakwood Estates HOA is now in session. Our first order of business is to address the incident involving our board president, Patricia Wilkins, and resident Alex Weber and his service animal." Catherine had advised me to let her do the talking, but it became clear that wouldn't be necessary. One by one, residents stood to speak, not just about my incident, but about years of Patricia's tyrannical rule enforcement, personal vendettas, and selective application of HOA regulations. She had my children's basketball hoop removed while I was at work, then fined me for improper storage when I laid it on the lawn, one man exclaimed. "She measured my grass with a ruler," an elderly woman added. "A ruler? Then fined me because it was a quarter-inch too long, according to her. She towed my daughter's car because it had an out-of-state college sticker claiming it violated the no commercial signage rule." Another resident fumed. The stories continued for nearly an hour. It seemed Patricia had spent years making enemies throughout the community, and now they were all eager for retribution. Finally, Gerald called for order. "In light of recent events and the pending criminal charges, the board has voted to remove Patricia Wilkins from her position as president, effective immediately. Furthermore, we wish to formally apologize to Mr. Weber and announce that we are updating our community rules to explicitly acknowledge the legal rights of service animal handlers." A cheer erupted from the assembled residents. Gerald continued, "Over the noise, additionally, we are implementing a new process for rule enforcement that requires documentation and board approval before any penalties can be assessed." As the meeting concluded, people lined up to pet Scout, after asking permission, and offer their support. What had begun as a traumatic incident was transforming the community in unexpected ways. Outside the community center, Catherine pulled me aside. This is going very well for us. The HOA's actions tonight amount to an admission of wrongdoing. Let's talk settlement strategy. But the story was about to get much bigger than our little community. I don't use social media much. Part of my PTSD management involves limiting my exposure to anxiety triggers, and social media had proven to be a significant one. But Maria had no such restrictions. The day after the HOA meeting, she called me, her voice brimming with excitement. "Alex, have you seen Twitter today or TikTok?" "You know I haven't," I replied. "Well, someone recorded Patricia being arrested in the garden and posted it online. It's gone viral. People are calling her HOA Karen, and the video has millions of views." I felt a knot form in my stomach. While Patricia deserved consequences for her actions, I hadn't wanted public humiliation to be among them. "There's more," Maria continued. "News outlets are picking up the story. A reporter from Channel 8 called me asking for your contact information." "You didn't give it to them, did you?" I asked, alarmed. "Of course not. But Alex, this is getting big. It's not just about Patricia anymore. It's becoming a conversation about service animals, HOA overreach, and disability rights." She was right. By that evening, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from unknown numbers. Emails flooded my inbox from journalists seeking comments. My doorbell rang several times with reporters hoping for an impromptu interview, which I steadfastly refused. Catherine called with advice: "Don't speak to the media without me present. Don't post on social media, and document any harassment or threats you receive." She paused, then added, "This publicity could work in our favor for the civil case, but we need to be careful." 3 days later, I received another surprise visitor, a representative from Patriot Paws, the organization that had trained Scout. "We've been following your story, Alex," said Melissa, the program director, "and we want to help. What happened to Scout is not just an attack on you, but on everything service animals represent." Patriot Paws offered temporary placement of another trained service dog while Scout recovered. They also offered to provide expert testimony for both the criminal and civil cases about the impact of Scout's temporary incapacitation on my health and daily functioning. Meanwhile, Patricia's life was unraveling. Her son's law firm distanced itself from her case, citing conflict of interest. The HOA officially removed her from the board and banned her from entering the community garden. Several neighbors reported that she had been seen leaving her condo, only in disguise, attempting to avoid recognition. The criminal case proceeded to court faster than expected. The district attorney, perhaps sensing a high-profile win, had prioritized the charges. When the court date arrived, Scout was recovered enough to accompany me, though he still showed some hesitation around strangers, a new behavior that broke my heart. The courtroom was packed. News cameras lined the hallway outside, and the judge had to warn spectators several times about maintaining decorum. Patricia sat at the defendant's table, looking considerably less polished than the HOA president I remembered. Her hair was unstyled, her clothes were plain, and she kept her eyes downcast. The prosecution presented a devastating case. Security camera footage from the garden clearly showed Patricia spraying Scout without provocation. Testimony from Dr. Sanderson about Scout's injuries, expert testimony about service animal legal protections, my testimony about Scout's training, certification, and the impact of his temporary incapacitation, testimony from multiple neighbors who witnessed the incident. Patricia's defense strategy seemed to hinge on ignorance. She claimed she didn't know Scout was a legitimate service dog, didn't understand the severity of using pepper spray, and had been acting to protect community property. Her attorney argued that while her actions were regrettable, they were not malicious. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts," the jury forewoman announced. Patricia's face crumpled as the verdict was read. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, the judge did not hold back. Mrs. Wilkins, your actions demonstrate a blatant disregard for federal disability protections, Judge Ramirez stated. Service animals are vital medical equipment for their handlers, and your interference with Mr. Weber's service dog could have had catastrophic consequences for his health and safety. The sentence came down: 6 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, a $10,000 fine, and 500 hours of community service specifically working with disability advocacy organizations. As Patricia was led away in handcuffs, I felt no satisfaction. Only relief that justice had been served and that Scout was beside me, fully recovered and once again performing his duties flawlessly. Outside the courthouse, cameras and microphones thrust toward me. With Catherine at my side, I decided to make a brief statement. Today isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about education. Service animals perform vital functions for people with disabilities, and interfering with them is not just inconsiderate. It's illegal. I hope this case raises awareness about service animal protections and the very real consequences of violating them. What I didn't say publicly was that our civil case had been settled out of court for a substantial sum. Patricia's homeowner's insurance had ultimately covered part of the damages, but she had been forced to sell her condo to pay the remainder. According to Maria, she would be moving to Florida after serving her sentence to live with her sister. 3 months after the incident, life at Oakwood Estates had transformed. The new HOA board, led by Elena, who had been unanimously elected, had implemented what they called the Scout Rules, a comprehensive set of guidelines acknowledging and protecting the rights of residents with disabilities. The community garden now featured a special section with raised beds designed for wheelchair accessibility, and a dedicated bench with Scout's name on a small plaque marked the spot where the incident had occurred. More importantly, residents who had previously kept to themselves had begun to connect. We discovered that Oakwood was home to 3 other service dog handlers, several residents using mobility aids, and numerous people with invisible disabilities who had previously felt unwelcome or uncomfortable in community spaces. The settlement money allowed me to make some significant changes in my life. I used part of it to pay for specialized PTSD treatment that wasn't covered by my veterans' benefits. I also established a small foundation to provide emergency veterinary care for service animals whose handlers couldn't afford unexpected medical expenses. Scout recovered completely, with no lasting physical effects from the pepper spray. If anything, he seemed even more attuned to my needs, more vigilant in his duties. We had weathered the crisis together, and our bond had only strengthened. 6 months after the incident, I received a letter with a Florida return address. I recognized the handwriting from the HOA violation notices that used to appear on my door. "Dear Mr. Weber," it began, "I am writing to express my sincere regret for my actions last spring. My time in jail gave me ample opportunity to reflect on my behavior, not just toward you and Scout, but toward everyone at Oakwood Estates for many years." Patricia went on to explain that she had been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder of her own, one that had manifested as a compulsive need for control and order. She was now in therapy and taking medication. "While this doesn't excuse what I did," she wrote, "I hope it helps explain it. I've come to understand that my desperate grip on community rules was actually a manifestation of my own fears and insecurities. I never stopped to consider that you might be dealing with challenges I couldn't see." The letter concluded, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that your case has changed my perspective forever. I hope Scout has fully recovered and that you are both doing well. I showed the letter to my therapist at our next session." "Are you going to respond?" she asked. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Part of me wants to. The other part thinks it might be better to close that chapter completely." "What would Scout advise?" she asked with a smile. It was a good question. Scouts training had been all about helping me move forward, face challenges, and find equilibrium in difficult situations. He had no capacity for grudges or resentment, only for addressing problems in the present moment. That evening I sat down and wrote a brief reply. Mrs. Wilkins, thank you for your letter. Scout has fully recovered and we are doing well. I appreciate your apology and wish you success with your treatment. Learning to live with anxiety is a journey I understand well. Scout would want me to tell you that second chances are always possible. Alex Weber. 1 year after the incident, Oakwood Estates held its first Community Service Dog Awareness Day, featuring demonstrations from service dog training organizations, information booths about disability rights, and an appearance by the local congresswoman, who had recently introduced legislation to strengthen penalties for service animal interference. Scout and I gave a short demonstration of his tasks, showing how he could retrieve medication, provide pressure therapy during anxiety episodes, and create space in crowded environments. Children asked questions, adults took literature, and community bonds strengthened further. As the event wound down, Elena approached me with a plate of her famous cookies. "You know, Alex," she said, handing me the plate, "something good came from that terrible day. Before Patricia sprayed Scout, we were just a bunch of people living in the same development. Now we're a community." She wasn't wrong. The incident that could have driven me further into isolation had instead connected me with neighbors who had become friends. The trauma that could have reinforced my PTSD had instead become a catalyst for advocacy and education. That night, as Scout settled into his bed beside mine, I reflected on the strange journey we had taken together. From the moment he was placed with me after training, he had been my guardian, my medical equipment, my lifeline. But through the Patricia incident, he had become something more, a symbol of resilience, a community champion, a catalyst for change. "Good boy, Scout," I whispered in the darkness. He thumped his tail twice against the floor in response, then drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that he had done his job well. 2 years after what locals now referred to simply as the incident, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference on disability rights and service animal protection. Catherine had connected me with the organizers, suggesting that our case study could help educate law enforcement, businesses, and community organizations about service animal laws. Scout, now 4 years old and in his prime working years, accompanied me onto the stage, his vest adorned with patches that included a new one, Federal Service Animal Protection Advocate. As I looked out at the audience, a mix of disability advocates, legal professionals, and service dog handlers with their animals, I began. 2 years ago, a woman with a can of pepper spray taught me that ignorance about service animal laws remains one of the biggest challenges for handlers like me. Today, I want to share how that moment of conflict ultimately became a catalyst for community education and legal enforcement. The presentation concluded with a slide showing our new community garden at Oakwood Estates, accessible pathways winding between raised beds, service dog handlers working alongside other residents, and Elena directing it all with a wooden spoon in hand. The garden where Scout was attacked is now a model of inclusive community space, I explained, and the HOA that once employed overlapping rules to exclude is now known throughout the region for its exemplary disability accommodation policies. During the Q&A session, a woman in the back raised her hand. "Has your perspective on what happened changed over time?" I considered the question carefully. Initially, I was angry, not just for Scout's pain, but because the attack temporarily took away my independence. But over time, I've come to see that what happened to us exposed problems that needed addressing. Before the incident, I was surviving with PTSD. After it, I found a community and a purpose. Scout and I both recovered stronger. After the conference, a law professor approached me. "We've been using your case in our disability law curriculum," she explained. "It perfectly illustrates how service animal interference laws actually work." "In practice," I shook my head in wonder. "When I got Scout, all I wanted was to be able to go to the grocery store without having a panic attack. I never imagined we'd end up changing how people understand service animal laws." "That's often how change happens," she replied. "One incident, one court case, one story that people can relate to." Back at Oakwood Estates, the community had continued to evolve. The newly elected HOA board, Elena had stepped down after her successful term, had implemented a comprehensive inclusion program that had become a model for other communities. Property values had actually increased, contrary to the fears Patricia and her allies had expressed about accommodating disabilities. Scout and I still visited the garden several times a week. The bench where we'd sat that fateful morning remained, though now it was surrounded by a small memorial garden planted by community members, flowers that bloomed from spring through fall, ensuring there was always color and life in that corner. Sometimes as we sat there, I would think about Patricia. According to Elena, who somehow maintained contact with everyone who had ever lived at Oakwood, Patricia had completed her probation and now volunteered at an animal shelter in Florida. The experience had changed her fundamentally, just as it had changed me. One evening, as Scout and I returned from the garden, we passed a new resident moving in, a young woman using a wheelchair with a service dog of her own guiding her. "You must be Alex and Scout," she called out. "The management office told me about you. I'm Jasmine, and this is Echo." We stopped to chat, our service dogs politely acknowledging each other with professional restraint. "I chose Oakwood specifically because of its service animal policies," Jasmine explained. "Do you know how rare it is to find a community with such clear guidelines and accommodation processes?" I smiled, thinking of how far we had come. "It wasn't always this way," I told her, "but that's a story for another day. Welcome to Oakwood. Jasmine, you'll find it's not just accessible, it's home." As Scout and I continued to our condo, I reflected on how a single moment of conflict had spread outward like ripples in a pond, creating change in ever-widening circles. From our garden, to our community, to disability law, classrooms and beyond, Scout, sensing my contemplative mood, pressed gently against my leg. His grounding presence reminded me of what was most important, not the past conflict, but the present moment and the community we had built together. "You're right, buddy," I said, reaching down to stroke his head. "Let's focus on what matters." Now, and together we walked through the garden gate, heading home.